The following modules discusses the new United Nations Model Life Tables developed in 1981, making up for some of the limitations of previous systems of life tables, such as the Cole and Demny life table models, which are mainly based on empirical data from the developed countries, or for those set of life tables, such as the original United Nations sets, where mortality patterns of less developed countries were included. The data was not of good quality. The new United Nations model life tables were able to obtain better quality data because of data availability. Reliability from many countries had itself improved given census, surveys and vital registration systems that made it possible to construct these tables. These tables are therefore based on careful evaluations of age-specific mortality data in developing countries, giving rise to 4 major patterns of mortality corresponding to a particular geographical region where the patterns was predominant, and a 5th general model which was an overall average pattern. Mostly it is now used to match mortality data of different countries with the existing model patterns, and not necessarily to consider these patterns as restricted to particular geographical areas. The new United Nations model life tables are less flexible, being 1-parameter models, unlike the Bros tables, and they do not capture the complexity of mortality patterns having been collected over a short period of time from a small number of populations at a time when there was a steep mortality decline. As a result, only a few life tables have been constructed for particular regions, as few as even 3. Aside from other limitations, they are, however, still widely used and applicable to the study of mortality data.
I am Dr. C.P. Prakasham, retired professor from International Institute for Population Sciences, Mumbai. Module 32, New United Nations Module Life Tables for Developing Countries. This is in continuation of the Module 29, where we have discussed about this small portion of United Nations Model Life Table. Previous systems of model life tables were based on empirical data from the now developed countries, the Cole and Demny models, or when patterns from less developing countries were included, the original UN set and the Lederman set included data for poor and unknown quality. With the improvement in data availability through census, surveys and vital registration, it has been possible to construct a new model life tables. With the available and reliable data for developed countries in the recent period, United Nations constructed model life tables in 1981 called New UN Model Life Tables for Developing Countries. The new model life tables constructed 36 life tables by sex, that is 36 into 2, 72. 16 pairs of life tables come from 10 countries in Latin America, 19 pairs from 11 countries in Asia, and 1 pair from Africa. 5 families of models were identified, each with a set of tables ranging from life expectancy of 35 to 75 years for each sex. Each family of models covers a geographical area: Latin America, Chilean, South Asia, Far Eastern, and a general. And the general model was constructed as an average of all observations. Characteristics of United Nations Model Life Table for developing countries. The new UN Model Life Tables are based on carefully evaluated age-sex specific mortality data found in developing countries. These data indicate 4 major age patterns of mortality according to the geographical region predominant in each pattern. These patterns have been labeled as the Latin American pattern, the Chilean pattern, the South Asia pattern, and Far Eastern pattern. Along with the model life table, the United Nations is also producing models of sex difference in life expectancy, single year mortality, and stable population. Latin American model. This model, when compared with family, exhibits high mortality during the infant and childhood years, mainly due to diarrhea diseases. At young adult age, largely due to accidents. At old age, low death rate due to cardiovascular diseases. Chilean model. The Chilean mortality pattern is characterized mainly by high infant mortality. This exclusive infant mortality was due to deaths from respiratory diseases. South Asia model. This model mortality pattern is identified by extremely high mortality under the age 15 and relatively high mortality at old age over age 55. Availability of mortality data is derived from Model Registration System, Cause of Death Survey, and International Diarrheal Disease Research Center in Matlab, Bangladesh. Far East model. Far Eastern pattern exhibits very high death rates at old ages compared with these at younger ages. This may be due to a past history of tuberculosis. General model. The general pattern, which can be considered an average of the 4 regional patterns described above, is similar to the West family of the Cole-Deminy set of model life tables. Patterns of human mortality are very diverse. The important point is that you have reliable evidence for the existence of the model pattern that is not restricted to particular geographical area. New UN model life tables for developing countries made attempt to construct with the available recent data for different geographical area with available causes of death. 3 main criticisms of the United Model Life Table. 1. Being one parameter system, the tables are less flexible and does not capture the complexity of the different mortality pattern available, and at times have not been able to describe life tables that have been considered accurate. Number 2. Also because mortality estimates per age group is linked through a methodology of changing to the infant mortality rate, errors of measurements are increased. Number 3. The initial model designed for developing countries was not well done, and some empirical tables are not reliable, have a narrow range of applications. Number 4. And common to a number of models is the limitations of being dependent on the data from which they were constructed, which have left out mortality schedules to a significant extent. The United Nations Model Life Table tries to address the limitations, but there were criticisms regarding selection and criteria of use of life tables. Number 5. As said, from various technical issues, HIV/AIDS being a major cause of death in the continent of Africa and also part of Asia. A 3-parameter system tried to the logit system has been proposed by the United Nations. The relationship between the United Nations life tables and the Koldemini life tables are outlined below. Number 1. Age-specific mortality patterns in less developed countries studied by the United Nations are different from the patterns recorded between 1850 to 1960 in the developed countries constructed from the mortality tables. The Koldemini pattern of mortality may not correspond to those of the modern developing world and are therefore not a good fit. The United Nations model life tables are more reflective of the mortality patterns of the developing countries, and the United Nations has also distinguished its model life tables as being for developing countries in contrast to the Koldemini model. Number 2. There are questions regarding whether the United Nations mortality patterns identified can also be seen to be in developed countries, as there may be more age singularity than regional similarities. Demographer feels that they need not be region specific, which is part of the confusion, although the United Nations models are generally known as regional models and were initially claimed to correspond only to the region from which their names were derived, such that the Far Eastern pattern corresponds only to Hong Kong, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore and nowhere else, and therefore only comparison with these models are appropriate. Number 3. Further, the data used for the empirical life tables for the United Nations model were collected over a short time from a small number of population during a time of sharp mortality decline. In addition, a single set of age-specific mortality rates were used for the majority of the population, which only represents mortality patterns of a very brief point of time, and even when grouped, comprised of very few tables. The example is given of the Chilean female mortality model being constructed from the 3 tables and the South Asian model on the basis of 4 tables from India, Iran, the Matlab area of Bangladesh and Tunisia, which were used to represent population mortality patterns of that table, but also for the subsequent construction of family model life tables, which varies other assumptions. C. Several methods to determine an appropriate life tables for a particular region outlined below. Number 1. Compare age-specific mortality data of the region with the mortality pattern of corresponding levels of life expectancy for each model table. The table which most represents the actual tables is the most suitable. Number 2. Regional demographers may have determined suitable life tables who can be consulted with as through review reports or country projections. Number 3. The crude death rate and infant mortality rates of the model may also be compared with actual data on the same, and the most suitable would be the table with the closest fit. Number 4. A computer program, DemProj, would generate crude death rate and infant mortality rate, which could be used to determine suitable tables.